afternoon to everyone who is joining us. We especially want to say thank you to anyone who is here during their school winter break or maybe watching the replay during their winter break. One thing we do want to let you know about before we begin, we are not going to be able to have chat available for this meeting. So if you have a question, just feel free as it comes to mind, just pop in, unmute, jump in, and let us know. We also have time for questions at the end as well. So feel free to just jot those down, and then we'll be able to address those at the end. At this point, I'm going to get our slide deck up and turn it over to Mike for introductions.
Charlie, thank you very much. Yep, thank you everyone for joining today, especially during your winter break. If you're still in school or in college, really appreciate your time today. This is something we've really wanted to do for quite some time, and we've had several clients ask us to put something together, either for their young adult children or college age children or whatnot, just for young adults. We're really excited for this topic today. When we began the practice way back in the 1990s, we consistently would work with young people and young families just getting up and running, getting started in their financial planning. It's really been a passion in our practice ever since then. We really love helping people get off on a good foundation and get started. So we're really excited about this topic today. Just a couple of things about us and the firm. Tarrant Financial Advisors is our firm. We're fully independent. We are a financial planning and wealth management firm. So we help people align their money with their life goals and avoid financial blind spots, and just make sure they're on a good path and manage their investments appropriately for that. We are also affiliated with Integrated Financial Group, which you see up on the screen. That's just a consortium of other independent advisory firms like ourselves. So there's over 90 plus advisors in the group now. We cover actually over 12 different states, and we are able to collaborate together, work together, do study groups together, annual retreats, and really just to bring big firm resources to our clientele, which has been quite nice for us. So we're able to be independent, but yet not alone. So that's nice. Then our team consists of 5 individuals you'll see up here on the screen. So folks you'd work with if you elect to work with us someday, myself and Charlie, Phoebe, who's on the line with us today, and our virtual assistants, Carrie and Liz. So when you work with Tarrant Financial, you work with us. You're not offloaded to someone else, and we try really hard to give personal service there. We also included some biographical information about ourselves. Of course, myself, I'm the founder of the company. I've lived in Roswell, Georgia here for well over 34 years. And you can see some of my experience there and also some previous activities I've been involved in. I've been financial planning since 1992. And then my colleague, Charlie, who's going to walk through a good bit of the presentation today, has been in the profession for over 15 years now and has a strong tax background as well. Great investment background, lives up and coming with 3 beautiful children and his wife, and just really excited for what he's going to bring to the table today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie for some of our presentation, and he and I will tag team a little bit and jump in, and we'll go from there.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike. So what we're going to do today really is the point of this is we want to just walk through some at a very high level, some financial planning concepts, things that can be useful, a few things that you can put into practice in your life as you or anyone you know is maybe getting started in the early part of their life, or maybe it's a little more like a reset in your financial life. So setting goals, we're going to walk through a lot of that. We're going to walk through some planning tips and really just try to keep it, like I mentioned, high level, not getting too deep in the weeds with anything, but give you some practical ideas and really a mindset going forward. So the first thing we would like to do is we always do this with every new individual and family that we start working with is called our 3-year vision. And this is really an exercise to set your goals. So we say is that we ask you to pretend that it's 3 years down the road. So right now it's the end of 2028, almost 2029. And you're looking back on today. What are some things that need to happen between then and now, or say from then back to now, that will make you feel good about your progress? That can be financial, it can be personal, it can be where you want, maybe it's getting your degree, maybe it's you want to have a career at a certain type of job. You want to have that started. You want to have a down payment saved for a house. You want to live somewhere different than you live today. Whatever that is, we really encourage you to write that down and then start putting a plan in place to take steps towards whatever that happens to be. And we call this our 3-year vision when we work with any individuals and families. We use this to set the stage for the financial plan. And we just find that we are going to plan for the long term, but it's a lot easier to see what's going to happen 3 years from now than it is beyond 3 years. So we'd like to start with that and kind of use it to frame the plan and what we're looking for there. So let's talk about some cash flow and budgeting. This is really something that tends to be top of mind for those getting started, but also just everyone we work with. What you make and what you keep is important. So if you're looking to kind of launch your adult life and you're thinking about, well, I'm going to have maybe this kind of type of career, I'm going to have this kind of income. What am I going to, how do I manage all that? What do I need to spend versus save? We have this, what we call the 70-20-10 plan, which is we believe very strongly in being generous, and the people, that's not a formula. People who are more generous tend to be more successful. So we'd like to encourage everyone that we work with to bake some kind of giving into their plan, and then plan to save or invest around 20% of that income. And then the rest kind of goes to taxes and your living expenses. So it's kind of a good back of the napkin kind of way to think, okay, well, I expect to make this kind of salary when I first start working. How much I'm going to actually have to live off of? Then, so after you take out your taxes from the 70%, that's kind of what you're left with.
Right. And that's really important too. We believe in automating what's important there. So, it's a great way to stay out of debt, which Charlie's going to talk about here in a minute, is try to automate as many of your bills as you can, have level payment plans, just have some great cash flow control. And then the non-monthly expenses, you really want to put those away in a savings account so that when that bill comes, you've got the money there. So, because without that, debt shows up, and Charlie's got some input on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so debt management, debt payment, that's a thing that we hear a lot from a lot of the younger people that we work with. First thing I want to say up front is not all debt is bad. So for example, if I were to go buy a car today and I was going to borrow $35,000, I could pay cash for that car, or I could borrow it at 0%. I'm probably going to borrow it at 0% because that leaves my $35,000 invested, or at the very least in the bank, earning interest. Whereas the borrowing that money doesn't cost anything. So low interest debt, not necessarily bad. Small balances, not necessarily bad. But really what we want to avoid is the bad debt, the stuff that's very high interest and high balances. So when you're looking, if you have a variety of different types of debt, like a mortgage, your car, maybe a car payment or two, you have, if they're credit cards, if they're student loans, we like to prioritize these by paying off the highest interest first, at least with some exceptions. Sometimes it feels good just to get something off your plate. So if there's a small balance, maybe knocking that out can make sense, even if it's not the highest interest. But in general, mathematically speaking, you do best paying off the high interest debt first. But some things we want to make sure that we don't do is we don't want to jeopardize our future by paying off debt now. And what we mean by that is, if you were to liquidate something that was an investment that's meant for long term, like retirement, we don't want to do that. We don't want to cash out retirement plans, typically speaking, to pay off debt. And I won't say never, because there can be some exceptions, but in general, when you add in the tax costs plus penalties for things like IRA or 401k, those tend to outweigh the interest costs on debt. So we would much prefer to let's leave those long-term investments in place where they are, let them keep growing. We're going to put a plan together to chip away at debt slowly, but steadily. And then another thing we like to talk about really is, if we're deciding, do I pay more than my minimum balance on the debt to get it paid off quickly, or do I focus more on long-term investing? And that's definitely going to be a conversation that depends on what your interest rates are. The rule of thumb there is, if you can earn more investing that money than the interest is going to cost, then you're going to want to put more money towards that long-term investing. So I would not stop contributing to my 401k to make more payments on a mortgage that's 3, 4, or even 5 or 6%. You want to, if it's a high interest debt like a credit card where you're paying 25%, absolutely, maybe it can make sense to temporarily suspend long-term investing to pay that down. But in general, what we call kind of our normal debt, our mortgages, our kind of moderate, our auto loans, things like that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Mike, do you have anything you would add to that?
No, I totally agree with that. It's really just striking a balance between debt repayment and long-term investing. We've seen folks who have had debt issues. At a worst, we try to have them still invest in their 401ks, at least enough to get their employer match, because that money is there on the table usually if that's offered, and just try to work toward getting out of debt as quickly as possible. But if you have a job that requires travel, it's not entirely remote, then a car is going to go toward earning your income. So we don't mind a car loan as long as it's a decent interest rate. Same thing for a house. Just encourage people not to overbuy, but maybe try to stay within your budget. But if you're young starting out, you kind of have a career plan, you may want to overbuy just a little bit on the mortgage if you think your income is going to grow into that, but you've got to be very careful not to overextend up front. So we like striking that balance between having money going to investments, prudent use of debt, not living on the debt is crucial, not living on credit cards, just trying to live with the debit card based or cash based system is going to really drive you toward long term success.
Great point about the overbuying just a little bit. If you're looking at a house and you think that maybe you could buy a house that's suitable for you now, but you might outgrow because you may be wanting to start a family or your family size may increase. Go ahead and get what you're going to need because it's typically going to be less expensive than having to make a move and deal with all of those real estate agent commissions and closing costs all over again. Not to mention the headaches. So definitely
Right.
a great point there.
I
Um,
kind of follow along with Dave Ramsey's philosophy on some of that, where you may want your total housing costs to be around 30 to 40% tops of your income. If you get much past that, you're going to have a hard time making ends meet, and definitely will have a hard time putting money away for your future. So when we
yeah.
say total housing, we kind of mean that, like utilities, all the maintenance, the repairs that might go into it. So just factoring that into your budget. We really love some of the online tools for folks who really aren't great at tracking money or aren't great with math or budgeting or whatnot. Things like Dave Ramsey's Every Dollar or the YNAB program, You Need a Budget. Those things are outstanding. They use like an envelope system, real easy to drag and drop your transactions, so you can see what your spending has been and what might be left for the month. Just a great way to stay on top of it without having to really dig deep into nickels and dimes.
Definitely. So when you're looking at paying off your debt and you're kind of deciding the pecking order, the debt snowball method is a way to really organize and prioritize what you're going to pay off and when. So usually we start with, like we mentioned, the highest interest rate, or it could be the lowest balance if the lowest balance is relatively small and you can get it paid off quickly. But the idea here is whenever you have one debt that's paid off, then you take the payment that you were making to that last one and you then apply it to the next one. And then once that one's paid off, then you apply all those payments to the next one and so on. So that as you go, the payment you're making on each one keeps getting bigger and bigger until it gets knocked out. Um, what we don't want to do generally is stretch a lot of these over extremely large periods of time, unless, of course, it's a very low interest rate. So I know that you can't get a new mortgage for under really under much under 6% right now. But some of the older mortgages out there are going to be in the 2.5, 3.5 kind of range. I'm not excited about paying any of those off early or making additional payments to those because, like we mentioned, if you invest that money, you can much likely get a much higher return over long term than you would saving that money by putting it towards that mortgage. So just to mention that, just to say that to mention that you don't necessarily go all the way down to zero debt using the snowball method, but this is a good way to get back to a manageable level. What those quote unquote bad debts that we don't like, getting those off the balance sheet first.
Right.
All right, let's talk a little bit about retirement planning. So we use for all of our clients a bucket strategy. And if you're not familiar with a financial bucket strategy, the way that works is you have three buckets of money. There's a short term, medium term, and a long term. And each one of those is for a particular purpose. So, for instance, our short term, we want to have an emergency fund at the bank that's going to cover 3 to 6 months of expenses. That is for stuff that you don't know is going to happen or when it's going to happen, but it could happen at any moment. So, your car can need a repair, or your home can need a repair, or you could have a medical bill that you weren't expecting. Things where you need to go somewhere for money quickly and you don't know when it's going to happen. We always want to have a certain amount put away. That's where we start. That's the foundation of really your entire plan, is making sure you've got liquid money available that is not invested in the stock market, because that money could be that those stocks could be down when you need to access it, and we don't want that. So those are things like your savings accounts. You can use money market accounts. You can use CDs to go out for a year or two to get a little bit more yield on some of those at times. But in general, we have emergency, want to go to that short term bucket. The medium and long term buckets, the idea here is we're going to have things put away for things we might need later. So an intermediate term bucket, maybe I may need a car 5 years from now, or I'm saving up for a down payment on a house. I don't know what the market's going to be doing when that time comes. So I want to have money that has some growth potential, but isn't taking too much risk, so that there's a high likelihood that whenever I go to draw it, it's going to be down at that time. So we like bonds and bond funds for this goal. Sometimes some defensive stocks that are generally not correlated with like the S&P 500, or what we consider the main stock market. Those can be a good way to get some growth, but not be too correlated with and by correlated, that just means that's going up in the same direction as the stock market at the same time, at the same magnitude. So if the stock market's up a lot, is it up a lot? That's highly correlated. If the stock market's down a lot and it's down a lot, that's highly correlated. But if they kind of move in opposite directions, or it doesn't really move in the same way at the same time, that would be an uncorrelated asset. Then the third one is a long-term bucket. This is where we're going to get most of our growth. And stock investing is the only asset class that has really proven over long periods of time to outpace taxes and inflation. And we're going to look at some slides here in just a few minutes that really drill down on that and illustrate that. But in general, we can depend on stock-based investing over the long term. Over the short term, anything can happen. It can be up tremendously, it can be down tremendously, or it can be flat. But over the long term, stocks have behaved a certain way. And like I said, we're going to see that in a minute. So the idea here is, if you have a goal that you're wanting to fund, it's 10 years away. Let's say putting a kid through college, and it's 10 years away. We want to start having most of that in that long-term bucket to get as much growth as we can for the first couple of years. And then we want to kind of start to dial it back. Or if we're getting close to retirement, we want it all in that growth bucket when we're more than 7 years from retirement. But as we get 3 to 7 years, we're going to want to kind of start dialing that back and making that more and more conservative. And then when we're in retirement, the amount that you're going to draw out, we just want to avoid a situation where we're like, okay, it's time to send you your monthly paycheck, or it's time to fix the roof, or whatever it is, and the stock market's down. Do we have somewhere we can create that cash liquidity for you that isn't down at that time? So we replenish these buckets if they're up, but if the market's down and it's time to move from one bucket to the other, we just wait until the market recovers before trying to level all those out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point, Charlie. And we find that the equity market is a lot like a waltz. It's 3 steps forward and 1 step back. Usually, if you look at it over 5 and 10 year periods, about every 3 or 4 years, you have a major more major pullback in that. I just call that more of a buying opportunity. If you still believe that America's best companies have great long-term futures, then you really like them when their prices are discounted, and there's a disconnect between the price and the actual value of the company. So if you like going to Kohl's and catching your favorite, shirt on sale for 20%, then you'll love buying America's best companies when their prices are down 20 to 25%. But realistically, you can expect in a stock portfolio for the market to have some kind of a breather every year within the year of between 10 to 15%. It just happens because it doesn't grow in a straight line. So this is why we love the bucket approach, just to align your money with your goals and just make sure that what you really need right around the corner is there when you need it. So yeah, great stuff, Charlie.
Mm.
Thanks.
And the last thing I mention is almost everybody's going to have a short term and a long term bucket. You may go through
Mhm.
periods where you have a medium term bucket, and some periods of parts of life where you don't need one. If you are, in your 30s and 40s, and you're employed, you're earning, you're accumulating, and you don't have any particular goals where you're trying to make a major purchase in the next 3 to 7 years, you may not need an intermittent bucket. And just to be fully transparent, that's where I am right now in my life. I don't need a medium term bucket. I don't have any bonds in my portfolio. I've got the emergency fund and cash, and I've got the long term investments and based investments, and there is no medium term bucket right now for me. Now, that'd be a different story if I was looking at retiring in the next 3 to 7 years. So just to kind of lay that out there too, is you don't necessarily need all three of these buckets. You may just have number one, number three.
True. Great point.
So, all right. So how do we get started? Well, no amount's too small to begin. We're going to be talking a lot about the power of compounding and why that's really true. Listen, it's not just financial planners speak to say it's no amount is too small to get started with, because compound interest is so incredibly powerful. Even a small amount early can make a bigger difference than a large amount later. So before we're going to look at that here in just a minute, but for where do we begin? We can do, like we mentioned before, we want to start with our high yield savings account for emergency fund. And we say high yield savings account because not all savings accounts are equal. Some earn very little interest, some earn more. On the high yield savings, we're looking at things like your online only banks, mostly things like places like Capital One, American Express, Ally. These are, and you can go to bankrate.com and pull a list of some of the banks that are paying the most competitive high yield interest rates. So we definitely recommend if you're going to be leaving something as an emergency fund, it's going to be there for a while. Let's make sure that it's getting a decent amount of interest. We don't want an account that's earning 0.2% if we can help it. Secondly, where do we go after that? So make sure that 3 to 6 months is there first. If you don't have 3 to 6 months put away in your emergency fund, start there. Make sure that's funded, because that's your lifeline. That's where you go if something unexpected and bad happens. Once that's in place, then a couple of great places to look at starting it would be with your employer's plan. If you have it when you're working, if you have an employer that has a 401k or 403b or simple IRA plan, something like that, go ahead and get started contributing. They're most likely going to offer some kind of match. So if you put money in, they're going to put in a certain amount also, up to a limit. That how much of their match you get can depend on how much you put in. So we highly recommend at least putting enough in where you get the full employer match, because otherwise there's free contribution from your employer that you're leaving on the table. And we want to get as much of that as we can. Once you've got that taken care of, another great tool is a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA is a special tax qualified account that you don't get any bit tax benefit from putting money in. So money, after tax money goes in, but while it's there, it grows. And as long as it stays there and grows until age 59 and a half, all of the money you draw out of it would be tax free. So that growth over your lifetime could be money that you never have to pay tax on. The other neat feature about Roth IRAs is you can always, even though the growth can only come out after age 59 and a half tax free, your contributions can always come out tax free. So you can be comforted knowing that if I put money into this account and something happens and I said I do need to get it back out, maybe you had an unexpected expense that exceeds that 3 to 6 months and you've got to go somewhere, the Roth IRA could be a place to look for that. So it's a good place to get started with. Also, that's why I called it here kind of a medium/long-term savings vehicle, because ideally you want it to be long-term, because that's how it works best as far as the tax benefit, the tax-free growth goes. But it can be accessed. It can be accessed earlier if needed. So why do we start early? There's a reason that compound interest is called the eighth wonder of the world. And we have a little illustration here that shows that, we think, pretty well. So let's just take two investors. One person puts in $10,000 a year into an account that's going to earn 6% interest per year. Okay, so investor one invests for 10 years, $10,000 per year. But then something happens, life happens, maybe this person became disabled and they were no longer able to contribute anything from there on out for the next 20 years. Okay. So $10,000 per year for 10 years, and then it stops, but it continues to grow at 6%. Investor number two waits to start investing. So it doesn't invest anything for the first 10 years, but then starts doing the $10,000 a year for 20 years. So by the end of it, since one contributed the same amount for twice as long, investor number two actually put in twice the amount of money into that account that investor one did. But yet investor one actually ends with more money. In fact, it's a lot more. It's what is that, about 160,000 more in the account just by starting early. This illustrates what we were mentioning earlier on about there's really no amount that's too small to start, especially if you increase that amount as you go. And Mike and I were talking about, when we were reviewing the slides for this, we were talking about some things that we didn't know when we were in our 20s, was how powerful that was. And I wish I had just started with $10 a month, maybe 20 back then, because of how much more further along that we would be if we both had done that. So if you're still in that early part of life, you're still in your 20s, your early 30s, and you haven't started putting something away, the message here is it makes much more difference than you think it would.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't stress that enough. Just want to encourage everybody about that. And if you have not invested and you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you're saying, man, I can't believe I missed all that. Don't beat yourself up on it, because now's a great time to start. Many mutual fund companies will let you in the door for a Roth IRA for $25 or $50 a month. 401k, 403b, like Charlie talked about, that's a percentage of your salary. And usually there's an employer match, and that employer match is there for the taking. It's one of the benefits of that job. So it's great to take advantage of that stuff. I can't tell you, having been in business almost 35 years, I can't tell you how many of our older clients have told us, I wish I had started sooner, or I wish we had met sooner. So take advice from your elders there, the wisdom they're offering, and that Charlie is offering too. And no amount is too small. It all compounds on top of itself. And you look at your account 20 years down the road and you wonder, how did it get that big? That's usually what happens if it's invested prudently. So great advice, Charlie. Appreciate that quite a bit.
And we've worked with a lot of clients too that did wait before they started, and they were still able to put together a comfortable retirement after it. Maybe not as comfortable as it would have been, but still, it's like Mike said, if you haven't started yet, it's not too late. Don't beat yourself up too much for it. But one of the reasons we want to make sure to start as early as we can is because inflation is going to be knocking. So just as you all know, things tend to get more expensive over time, not less expensive. And with assuming just a 2.9% inflation rate, if you need it in a 30-year retirement, which 30 years is what we plan on for retirement, the math says that if you started off drawing $8,000 per month that you needed to live off of, by the time you get to the 20th year, you're looking at needing $14,200 per month. And then by the time you get towards the end of your retirement, that has more than doubled to $19,000 per month. So we want to make sure that we are investing early and also investing in a way that we get enough growth to outpace the inflation. If you think about it, if an investment yields over time 4%, but inflation's 3% of that, you really only earn 1%. And that's just not enough to keep up with what your needs are going to be and what you're going to want to be able to do later in life. And we hear a lot of, or I'd say a lot, but I do occasionally hear when I'm just talking to people that I don't plan to retire, or I'm okay working. The problem is sometimes you don't get to make that decision. Sometimes your health and just how you feel dictates when and how much you can work and what you can earn whenever you get to your later years. So I just encourage you to be thinking about that and realize that it's not always how long I want to work, and maybe how long I'm able to work is really more the question. And so we'd like to really phrase it not so much as retirement, but really independence so that you can have the option, the freedom that if you still feel good and working keeps your mind busy and keeps you sharp and keeps you healthy, then by all means, please continue to do it. But you want to be in a situation where you don't have to work if you're not able to.
Right.
And how we get there is by prudent investing, of course. So anyone who's, if you just in case you're not familiar with mutual fund or ETF investing, we want to give you a quick overview, just really what a mutual fund is. And because that's the mutual funds and ETFs really are the primary vehicles that we use as our investments and our growth. So the way mutual fund works is investors right up here at the top, you put money into this fund. And so the fund manager gets all of the money that comes in from all the various investors, and it's all pooled together into one fund, and they use that to buy securities. That fund manager is in charge, along with his or her team, are in charge of selecting how the pool of money is going to be invested, what type, in stocks and bonds, is it a specific type of stocks? All of that's stated on the fund's investment statement. And then so they choose where to invest it. And then that generates a return. So that return can be price appreciation because the companies that they invested in grew. It could also be dividends. Sometimes there's interest if it's a bond fund or a money fund. Whatever that return is, that then gets returned, and the fund manager and the fund manager's team, they get paid a fee out of that to be able to compensate themselves because nobody has to earn a living. And then the returns after that are passed down to the investors. And then the cycle starts over, right? So you can sometimes they declare a dividend, you can choose to reinvest it, you can put more money into a fund, and then they've got more to invest. So really if you can think of it is this, it's really when you invest in a mutual fund or an ETF, you are hiring a particular manager to invest on your behalf. And you can either like what they do and keep investing there, or you can say, I'm not so sure this manager is doing a great job, or I don't think that this manager is investing the way that I would like it to or expected them to. Then you can change into a different fund. But that's just kind of a broad brush overview of how mutual funds work. An ETF is very similar structure to a mutual fund. ETF stands for exchange traded fund. The primary differences are an ETF, an exchange traded fund, trades intraday, which means I can buy and sell throughout the day, versus a mutual fund. You put your order in, and then it goes through processes that evening. The other big difference is ETFs tend to be more index based, so they're going to follow what a published index does more closely. And for that reason, since the fund management team isn't having to do as much research and make really critical decisions, that tends to bring the cost of those funds down versus a mutual fund. So just a broad overview of what the differences are there and what those mean. The things that a mutual fund or an ETF can invest in: equities, which is stock, that's ownership in companies. So when you buy stock in a company, you actually are a partial owner in that company, which entitles you to the growth as well as part of the income as dividend. They invest in bonds. They can invest and bonds are lending to companies. So the two primary differences there are are you owning the company or are you lending to companies? Growth tends to be much better when you own the company than when you lend to companies. Hence why we tend to focus on equities over bonds. Other things that mutual funds can own are things like money market notes and cash. The cash can be various currencies. It can be US dollar, it can be other currencies. There are lots of hybrid investments, alternative investments, which can include real estates and things like derivatives. But just think of the mutual fund as a wrapper that can own all these different things, and you're just hiring that manager to do that for you.
And just so y'all know, we were scheduled to go till 12:40, but since we started about 5 or so minutes late, we're going to talk for another 5 to 7 minutes. So just wanted y'all to know we're going to go through the entire presentation.
Yes, if you do have to hop off before we're done, we'll have a replay emailed out later on. But so feel free to hop off if you need to go. But we'll go ahead and close out. All right, so we do want to, can't mention investing without mentioning diversification. And that's just having, not having all the eggs in one basket, so that if you have even a diversified portfolio, some parts of it are going to be down at certain times. We want to make sure that not everything's down at the same time to try to get as smooth of a ride as we can. And again, part of that is if you need to cash this out and use the money, we want to have somewhere to go in your portfolio that's not down. Great example was in 2022, stocks and bonds generally were down, but we actually had in our portfolios, we had some of the more defensive stock positions were not down. So if we had a client come to us and said they needed money, we were able to start there. And in most cases, sell something that either had either a small gain or or only a small loss in it in order to fund that. So the diversification is important for that reason, to smooth things out and make sure you also have sure you have the exposure to all the different parts of the market. So if you only invest in, let's say, small company stocks, well, that might have been bad over the last few years because the largest companies in America have been the ones that have grown the most. But there may come a time where that's flipped, where the large companies are going to struggle versus the small companies. We don't know when or where that's going to happen. So just being diversified across all of those different types of asset classes, industries, geography as well. So not just investing in the US, but across over the world. All of that can just help you get exposure to all of that and not miss out on what could be the best part of the market that year.
Right. And that's where mutual funds and ETFs work really well, is those professional money managers make those allocation decisions, as opposed to an investor having to research and select their own stocks and their own bonds. So those are investments that give a great, easy way to be fully diversified across different asset classes. So we have a couple of sample allocations we'll show you on the screen to kind of give you an idea of what to expect out of different asset classes.
So we have these here. These are the dark blue you see. That's going to be your stock-based portfolio, part of the portfolio. Your lighter blue is going to be the bond side of the portfolio. Where we like to start early in life is with this 100% on the right here. And then as you get closer to retirement, you might want to protect some of that income. So if you know you're going to need X amount of dollars per year, then you may want to have a year or two or three in that bond side of the portfolio. Again, for when you need to come to the well, so to speak, to making sure there's something we can sell and not sell it at a loss. And some of the more really conservative allocations you may not even necessarily need later in life, but they could be appropriate if you had let's just say a purchase or liquidity need that we knew exactly when it's going to happen, and we know it's exactly 3 years from now, 4 years from now. We might go to something like that 40-60 or maybe a 50-50 to try to get some growth, but have a part of the portfolio and a less volatile investment. We might look at something like that. So again, this is just kind of how it lays out as far as what we consider a moderate versus growth allocation. Some people may call that growth allocation aggressive. It can be aggressive if you use aggressive stocks, but just putting something into a primarily stock-based portfolio doesn't necessarily mean it's extremely aggressive. It just means it's very growth oriented. Because we know there are lots of different types of stock investments. Some are very aggressive, some are more moderate. So we didn't want to label it that way and just kind of paint a broad brush there. But the reason that we prefer to invest in a high growth allocation over a long term, especially if you got a long time to go, is over time, stocks have a fairly predictable return. The longer the time horizon you look at, the more predictable they become. So here on this chart on the left-hand side, you can see in 1 year, I said earlier, 1 year, anything can happen. Literally can. So from 1950 to 2024, you could have had a negative 37% return. You could have had a positive 52 or anywhere in between. And those are actual historical returns that had happened. And that's on the green bar there. On the blue one was your bond portfolio. You can still lose money with bonds. You can see that, as you can see there on a 1 year period, it's generally not as likely you can lose as much, but also not as likely you can gain as much on the bond side of the portfolio. And then the gray is just a mixture, like a 60% stocks, 40% bond portfolio. It's always going to land somewhere in between. The point here is the further out you go to 5 years, to 10 years, to 20 years, even though stock-based investing is really unpredictable on a 1 year basis, on a 20-year basis, it's much more predictable. You're looking at somewhere between 6% to 18%. And I don't know about you all, but I would rather have somewhere in the 6 to 18% range than the 1 to 11 or the 5 to 15. Again, when we're close to the goal we need it for, we don't want to necessarily be 100% equities. We want to be more diversified. But for long term, if we've got 20 years or more to invest, we feel pretty confident about what we can expect there.
That's a great point. Just circling back, to the bucket approach there, you can kind of see that we typically will use bond funds for that intermediate term bucket, savings accounts, money market funds for the short term bucket, and stock funds and whatnot for the long term bucket. So when we send the slide deck, we'll include a slide of common pitfalls for y'all so you can review those. But generally, if you're sticking with your plan, sticking with your mutual funds and ETF managers, letting them do their work, being patient through market cycles, you should see increases in value over time, even though in shorter time periods you may see some fairly sharp declines there. So we just, believe that slow and steady wins the race when it comes to investing, not taking huge bets on money that you're really going to have to rely on later down the road. Want to tie off today with a little bit of tax and insurance planning, just pivoting from investments here for a moment. Obviously, as you begin your career or already in your career, you're paying income taxes and probably getting used to seeing that all over your paycheck, and where tax dollars are going to the federal government, state government, FICA taxes, things like that. So, we do believe it's not so much what you make that's important. It's definitely what you keep. So we would just encourage you to be proactive in your tax planning. A lot of folks really wait till tax time to see what their bill was, and then they try to make their withholding adjustments right there. But really, we would recommend a mid-year tax check-in with a CPA or a tax professional, or worst case, if you're preparing it yourself, just run your own tax projection and make your adjustments that way, and just be on top of what your withholdings look like. Very important, because you want to try to have as much money invested as you possibly can. Then looking at insurance and benefits for a moment, very important to have yourself protected. So generally, when you're really starting out, kind of getting up on your feet financially, even through midlife there, your ability to earn your income is usually your largest asset, actually. It could be a 401k or a home is on paper a significant asset, but it's really your ability to earn that income is your largest asset, and to be able to put that money away and build those assets up. So we want to encourage you to look at adequate amounts of life insurance, disability, having your auto and home properly insured. Of course, medical coverage goes without saying. That's probably the most sought after employee benefit of all, is having good coverage there. It can be super expensive. We would say worst case, try to have major medical coverage so that those catastrophic events don't just derail you completely financially, but you may not necessarily need that low deductible plan. If you can afford to make your doctor's visits out of pocket, you may want to steer toward a high deductible plan. Combine that with the healthcare savings account to put money away, for your health expenses. Tax favored can be a great way to go too. The disability insurance, I think, is overlooked quite a bit. Most of the time, a large employer especially, is going to have a great group benefits package, which will include some life insurance and disability insurance at very favorable rates. But we really encourage you to look hard at having somewhere between 2/3 to 75% of your income insured for disability income purposes, because that risk is much more likely at younger ages than passing away is going to be. Then for life insurance, definitely having debt covered, mortgages covered, but also survivor income is important. So we find a lot of folks are underinsured for life insurance, when realistically they probably need life insurance of anywhere between 10 to 20 times their income, because that gives a very big bucket of money for survivor income, for future retirement, college planning for their children, things like that. So just want to make sure the coverage is adequate there for your protection in case something happens to you. Then kind of wrapping up with the estate planning here for a minute, just kind of the basics, we have an old joke in our business. If you don't have a will, the state you live in has one for you, and you may not like what it says. So basically, even if you don't have a lot of assets yet, a will is going to be important for just directing where your assets land if you pass away prematurely. So that can be, your home, your car, your bank accounts, or whatnot. So you definitely want to have something in place. There's some online sources for that, or you can see an estate attorney to have that written. The advanced directive for healthcare is going to really dictate or define what kind of health provisions you want to have made for yourself if you have a catastrophic illness, or if you're unable to make healthcare decisions, it appoints someone to do that for you. And then the power of attorney would appoint someone to handle your financial affairs if you're unable to do so. So that's kind of the big three of the estate planning documents to have in place early. And definitely, if you have children that are over the age of 18, you're going to have serious issues accessing healthcare with them due to HIPAA laws and whatnot, privacy laws. So if you have a child who's about to turn 18 or is just over 18, that is not the gift they want given to them, but giving them a medical power of attorney and a financial power of attorney is essential and critical for you to be able to help them if something were to happen until they're up on their own. Then circling back up to the top there with beneficiary designations, we find time and time again people fail to make beneficiary designations on their retirement accounts and their life insurance. So just make sure you check those boxes, name the people as your beneficiaries that you want to receive your accounts if something happened to you. You can also do that on bank accounts and on investment accounts. You can set up what's called a transfer on death designation, which functions like a beneficiary. And then, of course, joint tenants with rights of survivorship can be a way that you title your house or title your bank account so that if you pass away, it automatically ports over to your co-owner, whether that's your spouse or a significant other or a family member. So that's we can do an entire presentation on estate planning, but just wanted to give you a broad brush. While you're thinking about your cash reserves, your debt management, getting started with investments, don't ignore the risk management part of the financial planning either. And just make sure that you've protected yourself and your family from those catastrophic events. So we'll kind of wrap up with ways you can get started. We just kind of highlighted that. Definitely open and fund a savings account. Consider Roth IRAs for long-term investments. Regular investment accounts outside of a Roth IRA can work well as also, along with your company's employer retirement plan. Make sure you've got adequate life and disability insurance. And we offer starter plans for folks who are interested. So we can do what we call a starter plan, which covers the financial planning basics. If you want to go much more deeper and see projections and kind of what, how much you should be saving for certain goals and for retirement and whatnot. And we'll include the package in this slide in the package for you there. So we've got a few minutes left just in case there's any questions. Just you can unmute and jump right in.